Hello friends, we are continue our lessons about ecology. You remember we studied two lessons before. The first lesson we studied on the origin of Earth and origin of life. In second part we studied the basics of ecology. In this lesson, as you can see, we're going to study on ecosystem and relation between living things in ecosystem. A group of organisms and abiotic factors which found in the environment together form an ecosystem. So ecosystem made up of what? Made up of living and non-living things that found in environment. So means what? Air, water, rabbit, plants, or soil, sun, light, temperature, all together they form ecosystem. So you may remember in previous lesson we studied the biotic factors, which are living things in environment, and the abiotic factors, which are non-living things in our environment. These abiotic factors can be wind, sunlight, soil, temperature, atmosphere, and water, which have effect on life of living things. There are different types of ecosystems, like the aquatic ecosystem. Aqua is about water. So the living things with their surroundings in water, aquatic ecosystem like a lake or river or sea or ocean. Terrestrial ecosystem, terrestrial about something which is on land. So land ecosystem can be a cave or a desert or a forest. And micro ecosystem, a small piece or place which some living things continue their life. It can be a part of our body or can be a bark of a tree. So some bacteria live in our large intestine, so large intestine is a micro ecosystem for this bacteria. Organisms that live in same ecosystem need each other in many ways. How you remember before we talk about the photosynthesis? Photosynthesis takes place by plant, and in ecosystem we see plants need water, which is non-living, but plant and animal, they depend on one another. This rabbit give out CO2, which plant use in photosynthesis, and plant give out oxygen, which this rabbit need to survive. So the living things in one ecosystem, they depend on one another, or we can say they need each other in many ways. Let's start first with aquatic ecosystems. An aquatic ecosystem is an ecosystem in a body of water. As you remember before, we said ecosystem, living and non-living things together, we call them ecosystem. So as we see in this part, a sea or a marsh or a lake, a river, a deep of ocean or a dam, or places or bodies of water which contain life. So these bodies of water with living contents, we call them aquatic ecosystems. So when we need to remember aqua related to water, water contain living things, is any of them example for aquatic ecosystem, which is sea, ocean, dam, marsh, river, lakes. Terrestrial ecosystems, Greenland, as we see in this first picture, we see all green but consist of short plants which grow in soil on land. We don't see bodies of water, so it's example for terrestrial ecosystem. Desert, and in this picture too we can see there are only some short plants with not so big plants and plants which need less amount of water, also is example for terrestrial ecosystem. In number 3 we see a cave, the largest cave on earth. Also they are terrestrial ecosystem which contains some kind of living things. Valleys, the flat area between number of mountains which contain living things, also an example for terrestrial ecosystem. And also that mountains contains number of living things, also they are examples for what? For terrestrial ecosystem. So for ecosystem we can say any part of earth which contain living things is ecosystem. But if it is water, living things live in water, aquatic, but live on land, it's terrestrial ecosystem. We need to remember some example for each of them. Micro ecosystem, spatial areas where specific organisms can live are called as micro ecosystems. We need this term. Micro means too small, like microorganisms or microbes. So the small ecosystems, if we compare with aquatic, which can be an ocean or sea, is so much big. For terrestrial ecosystem, a valley or desert or mountains are so much big, but micro ecosystem, small places which organisms can live. Ants live in a bark of a plant, like we see in this picture. Example for micro ecosystem. Those small piece or part of a small plant is a shelter or like a house for this small ant to live. So it's an example for micro ecosystem. Some bacteria live in our large intestine, and we see in this picture large intestine contain number of bacteria, but this bacteria, most of them useful bacteria, we live together, they live. So this large intestine is place for bacteria to live, an example for micro ecosystem. Ecological balance, as you remember, we said in this lesson we're going to study on relation between living things in ecology. If we recall the definition of ecology, it's a branch of biology which study on relation or interactions between living things with one another and with their environment. We classify organisms into 3 groups according to type of feeding. Like what in the first part, producer. The producers are the organisms which can produce their own food, like what? Like plant. They produce their own food by taking carbon dioxide from air, absorbing sunlight, energy by chlorophyll in the green leaves, and water through their roots to produce food and oxygen. So they produce food which is their own food. So we call them producer. Consumers are the living things which consume the food that produced by plants or producers. So plant produce it, animals and human consume this food, so that we call them as consumer. In this picture we see a deer and a tiger, both of them consumer. While the deer consume the plants, but the tiger consume the other animals, but at the end both of them consumer. They get their food from their environment, but then cannot produce it. And the number 3, we see decomposer, that decompose, broke down some materials and changed their form. So the living things which do this activity, we call them are decomposer. They consume or eat dead plants or dead animals and decompose them, transform them, change them into the simpler forms of matter. Like in forest, a plant or animal die on earth, but after several months, the parts of these living things are broken down and changed into the soil by what? By decomposers. So decomposers broke down dead part of animals or plant into simpler or smaller pieces. So as we can see, the mushrooms are example for decomposer kind of worm, especially earthworm are decomposers, and also bacteria example for decomposers. So the living things in an ecosystem can be one of these three groups: producer, consumer, or decomposer. Let's start with producers. Organisms which can produce their own food by using sunlight energy, water and carbon dioxide in presence of chlorophyll, which is green color found in leaves, and sunlight from sun, get water through their roots and CO2 again through their leaves to produce food by photosynthesis. So this kind of organisms, we call them as producers. Plants are eukaryotic multicellular organisms and producers. Consumers, organisms which feed on another organism, cannot produce their own food but get their food from environment, we call them consumer. Animals that feed on plants are primary consumers. So if we look at this picture, elephant feed on plant, primary consumer. This zebra feed on plant, also primary consumer. This turtle eat leaves, primary consumer. This animal also eat what? Giraffe, plants, leaves of plants, also primary consumer. Kangaroo feed on plant, primary consumer. These small animals also, they feed on seeds, but this was sometimes can eat some animals. Bear eat animals and plants, also this 1 and 2 and 3 organs there can be secondary consumer. Why? Because they feed on animals, not directly on plants. As we know, bear can eat fish and also can eat pear. So secondary consumer. The fox can eat any of these organisms or can eat a chicken. So also it's what? Secondary consumer. So plant produce food, primary consumers like zebra eat the plants, so they are primary consumer, but another organism like the tiger, a fox, or jackal, they feed on primary consumers, we call them secondary consumer. But the largest consumer, which largest picture is human, master of consumers. Decomposers, these organisms feed on dead organisms and convert them into inorganic material, which we can call it as mix, which is soil. So plants die, bacteria convert them into soil, animals die, convert them into soil, human dies, bury them under the soil, and the body decay and change into the soil by what? By decomposers. So earthworm, example for decomposers, mushroom, decomposers, and some kind of insects, they are decomposers, bacteria, the largest group of decomposers. So decomposers decompose body of dead organisms. So this producer, consumers, and decomposers in ecosystem, they make a chain, like plant produce food, get energy from sunlight, then this plant's eaten by primary consumers, which are animal, and primary consumer eaten by secondary consumer, but any of them, plant or primary or secondary consumers, die, their dead body are broken down by decomposers. So this linear food chain is a linear chain, start by producer, then by what? Consumer, and then secondary consumer or predator, which also consumer, and finally by decomposers. This linear chain, we call it as food chain. The food chain always start by producer and end by decomposers. A food chain consists of producers, consumers, and decomposers. All organisms need energy to live and complete their life cycle. You remember from common characteristic of living things, one point is using energy. The main source of energy is the radiant energy from sun, but it is unusable by all organisms. So this deer cannot use sunlight energy directly, but get it from where? Energy from plants. This tiger cannot get sunlight energy directly, not from plant, but from what? From dead animal. So there is a relation between this structure or living things. We call it as food chain, because always the previous one feed the second organism to make a chain of food. We call it food chain. Food web is a terrestrial or aquatic system, can be in water, in ocean, or in desert and forest. Starts with plants, again, which are producer, and continue with many food chains. Many food chains containing various animals. We said food chain is a linear shape, and we start by plants. We can go to the rabbit, then to this big mouse, then to the owl. Or for this, we start by grass to the grasshopper. From grasshopper back to the mice, then to the owl. Or grass to the mouse, mouse to the snake, snake to this owl. So, as we can see, the food web consists of number of what? Number of food chain. So many food chain all together are formed what? Make a full food web. As we can see, this relation between organisms, we show them, it mixes with one another, look like a web. But the relation between this organism about what? About food. So we call it food web. As food chain, food web also start with producer, then the plants which live on, animals live on plants, herbivores, like primary consumer, then the secondary consumer or carnivores which eat another animal, and the secondary consumer or tertiary consumers which is located at the top of the food web. So food web equals to number of food chains. Food chain are linear shape which show the relation between living things in ecosystem about food. So this relation between organism about food, number, biomass, or energy can be shown in different diagrams. For example, in this part I show a shape of pyramid in ecosystem, so we call them ecological pyramids. A graphical representation of the relations show the relationship between different organisms in an ecosystem. As we can see at the bottom of this pyramid, also there are producers, then what? Consumers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary consumers. But as we go from bottom to the top, we can see the number of organisms, the type of organisms always decrease. What in ecological pyramids is, which is a graphical representation or diagram, show the relationship between different organisms in an ecosystem. The pyramids of biomass, living mass, like what? Weight. So the total mass or amount of living material in an ecosystem, we call it biomass. So biomass, as we see from this picture, there are many kinds of plants. In second trophic level, we see some animals which feed on plants, but number is decreased, like 5, then 4, then 3, but also like one grasshopper by itself, for example, if 100 gram, but need what? Need about 1 kilogram of food. So as we go up, the biomass decrease, and in next level, number of organisms decrease, because one snake eat how many? Maybe about 10 of this mice. Then this animal, not only one, but need maybe 10 of this snake. As we go from bottom to the top, what happened? The biomass decreases. So the organisms in the chain convert only 10% of energy in food into the biomass. So as this mice eat 1 kilogram of food, but only gain 10 grams. Like what? One snake eat about 100 mice, but gain weight about only one of them. So only about 10%, or we eat 1 kilogram of food, 90% of it we use it, we burn it, we use it as energy, but we gain only 100 grams, which is 10% of food that we consume. So simply, pyramid of biomass is a graphical shape representation which show the amount of weight of living things in each level. Of each of these levels, we can call it as trophic level. Like producer, one level, primary consumer, next level, secondary consumer, another trophic level. As we go to top, the biomass decrease. Pyramid of numbers, it shows the total number of organisms, again, each trophic level in given ecosystem. Like we can see millions of grass, but millions of grass can be food only about how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 zebra. 9 zebra only adequate for a lion for 1 year, maybe. So as we see, from thousands decrease to the tens, from tens to the 1, for what? In number of pyramids of number in ecological system, which we call it ecosystem. Again, as we go from bottom to the top, what happened? Number of organisms decrease. Pyramid of energy, it shows the energy content in the each trophic level. We know why we get the food or we eat the food, to gain energy, and then use this energy in daily life activities and use it to grow. Like we eat this food for this aims, all living things also similar. So we know the sun is the main source of energy, give that energy, and this energy can be used directly only by plants which have green color, and they convert it into the food. So we call them producer. Producers are consumed or eaten by consumer, primary consumer, secondary and tertiary consumer. But as we said before, in each level, like 10% of energy only transferred or transported to the next level, while from sun to the producers, only about 1% of energy is captured. So 10,000 joules of energy which is captured by plant only transferred to the next level, like what? 1,000, only 10%, then 10%, then 10% transferred to the next level. And energy pyramid is the best way to explain the flow of nutrients in an ecosystem, because we said how much energy is used, how much is transferred or transported to the next level. Not about numbers or not about the biomass, about what? About the amount of energy. Why? Because which is transferred between trophic levels. So pyramid of energy, it shows the energy transfer through trophic level in an ecosystem. So what we gained from this lesson, we know in ecosystem living and non-living things in an area. So these non-living things are abiotic factors like wind, temperature, water, soil, air. Living things in three groups: producer, consumer, or decomposer. So these living things, they make a chain in ecosystem which we call it food chain, because the first one always, or previous one, food for second group of organism. Like the producers are food for primary consumer food for secondary consumer source of food for tertiary consumer. So this relation between living things can be shown in different types, like food chain, food web, or pyramids. The pyramids sometimes show number of organisms, or show the biomass of organism, total weight of living things, or show the energy transfer through between organisms through trophic levels. See you in next lesson.